She was not supposed to be happy this easily. That was the thought that woke Binta at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday, 6 weeks after the proposal, 4 weeks after the wedding date was set, 3 weeks after Jayeon had cried in a bridal shop for 45 minutes over a dress that wasn't even hers. Binta lay in the dark of the Hanamdong townhouse that had quietly become home and listened to Min-ho breathing beside her, steady, certain, the rhythm of a man who had never once in his life lost sleep over uncertainty, and felt the old fear move through her like cold water finding a crack. This is too much. This is too fast. Something will take it. She pressed her hand flat against her sternum and breathed. His voice came from the dark, unhurried. "You're thinking too loudly." She turned her head. His eyes were open. He was watching the ceiling, but he had been awake. He was always awake when she was. "I didn't say anything," she whispered. "You never have to." He turned his head and looked at her in the dark. "Tell me." She was quiet for a moment. "Then what if I'm not built for this kind of life?" He said nothing. He let her finish. "Your world," she said. "The power, the enemies, the way people look at you, at us now. I came to Seoul to build something quiet. A kitchen, recipes. Something that belongs to me." She stared at the ceiling. "I'm afraid of disappearing inside your orbit." Silence lasted long enough that she thought he might not answer. Then he sat up, turned, and looked at her with those obsidian eyes that she now knew had layers, the public layer, cold and absolute, and this layer, the private one, which was the most honest thing she had ever seen on a human face. "Your restaurant," he said, "has your grandmother's name on it, not mine." He paused. "Your recipes, your kitchen. Your staff, your vision, I have not touched one element of it." Another pause. "I would not, ever." She knew this was true. That was not what she was afraid of. "I'm afraid," she said slowly, finding the real thing underneath, "that I will love you so much I will forget to be afraid of the right things." He reached out and tucked one curl behind her ear. The gesture was so gentle from hands she had seen still a room full of dangerous men. "Then I will be afraid of the right things for both of us," he said. "That is what I am for." She looked at him for a long time. "That," she said finally, "is either the most romantic thing anyone has ever said to me or a very sophisticated way of being controlling." His lips moved, just barely, the thing that lived where a smile would be on anyone else. "Both," he said, "probably." She laughed despite herself, that real laugh, the chest one, and he watched it with the expression she was still not used to, the one that said she was extraordinary for reasons he was still discovering. She fell back asleep before he did. He lay in the dark and watched the ceiling and made 3 silent decisions about her safety that he would implement by morning without telling her, because some things were easier as facts than as conversations. The following morning, Seoul was loud and golden and smelled like autumn turning to winter, and Binta arrived at the restaurant at 7 to find her head chef, a round-faced Ghanaian Korean woman named Abina, had already been there since 5 and had developed strong opinions about the new dessert menu. "Thiacre needs more condensed milk," Abina said, not looking up from her notebook. "And I want to add a Korean sesame brittle on top, sweet and nutty. Your grandmother would approve." "My grandmother," Binta said, hanging up her coat, "would first want to know who gave you permission to modify her recipe." "You did, last Thursday." "I was distracted last Thursday. By your very handsome fiancé who came to bring you lunch even though you told him not to." Binta put on her apron. "The condensed milk amount stays. The sesame brittle is genius. Tell no one I said that." Abina smiled into her notebook. "The reservation list for Saturday is full." "There is a wait list of 31 people. 31, Binta. We have been open 6 weeks. Binta stopped, put both hands on the prep counter, let the number land, 31 people on a wait list, her grandmother's name above the door, her recipes on the plates. "'Kay," she said quietly. And then, because she was alone with Abina and the kitchen and the morning, "Okay, Grandma, we're doing it." Later that week, the food magazine profile came out. It was not the small mention they had hoped for. It was a full 2-page feature with photographs, the journalist having apparently fallen so completely in love with the Thigbudian Gochujang fusion that she had extended her piece by 800 words without being asked. The headline read, "The restaurant that tastes like 2 worlds finally meeting. Jayeon bought 12 copies." Min-ho had exactly one framed and placed it in his office at Kang Tower without mentioning it to Binta, which she discovered 3 weeks later when she visited him for lunch and stopped dead in the doorway of his office, seeing it there on the wall between his industry awards and a photograph of his late father. She stood in the doorway. He looked up from his desk. "You framed it," she said. "Yes, between your father's photograph and your industry recognition." She pressed her lips together. She was not going to cry in his office. She had made this rule. Min-ho, you are going to make me cry in your office. There is a bathroom to the left if you need a moment. She laughed. He stood and came around the desk, and she met him in the middle of the office, and he held her arms around her, her face against the lapel of his suit. And outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Seoul went about its enormous indifferent life while in here. In this room, something very private and very permanent continued to grow. 3 weeks before the wedding, the second enemy arrived. This one wore better clothes than Woo Byung-soo and was considerably more dangerous because she smiled like she meant it. Her name was Han Soo-yeon. She was 32, Seoul's most prominent entertainment attorney, and she had been, for a period of 2 years approximately 7 years ago, something to Kang Min-ho that nobody in his orbit discussed directly. She appeared at a Kang Corporation charity event. Her law firm was a sponsor, in a gown the color of winter ice, and she sought Binta out with the precision of a woman who had done her research. "You must be Binta," she said, extending a hand with a smile that was perfectly calibrated. "I've heard so much. The restaurant is extraordinary. I went last week. The jollof risotto changed my life." Binta shook her hand and assessed her in the 3 seconds of the handshake. Intelligent, controlled, here with a purpose. "Thank you for coming in." "Ho has excellent taste," Han Soo-yeon said, and the sentence had 2 meanings and they both knew it. "He always did," Binta smiled. "He does." She agreed pleasantly. "Excuse me, I need to check on the catering flow." She found Min-ho 20 minutes later near the bar and said very calmly, "Han Soo-yeon is here." Something moved behind his eyes. "I know her firm sponsored the event. I didn't anticipate she would attend personally." He looked at Binta directly. "It was 2 years. It ended 7 years ago. It ended because I ended it." She disagreed with the decision. Does she still disagree? It doesn't matter. Min-ho. Binta kept her voice even. "I am not asking from insecurity. I'm asking because a woman with that kind of intelligence and that kind of agenda in our orbit 3 weeks before our wedding is information I need." He looked at her, that full, serious look, the one that meant he was recalibrating his respect for her upward, which she had not known was possible. "You're right," he said. "I'll handle it." "We'll handle it," she corrected. "I'm not a person you manage around. I'm the person you handle things with." Look again, recalibrating. "Yes," he said, and then, quietly, "I forget sometimes that you are stronger than everyone in any room you walk into." "Forget again," she said, and went back to the event. That evening, after the event, Han Soo-yeon appeared at Binta's side near the coat check with the timing of someone who had been waiting for the right moment. "Want you to know," Soo-yeon said quietly, the social mask down now, speaking woman to woman with something that was almost honesty, "that I am not here to interfere." "Good," Binta said simply. "I came because I wanted to see who finally did it." A pause. "Who finally got through to him?" Binta looked at her. Soo-yeon's expression, unguarded for this one moment, was something complicated, not malice, not quite grief, more like the particular feeling of understanding something too late. "He never looked at me like that," Soo-yeon said. "Not once in 2 years. He looks at you like—" She stopped, reassembled. "Take care of him. He is not as invulnerable as he performs." "I know," Binta said. "I'm not going anywhere." Soo-yeon nodded once. Then the mask was back and she was saying a pleasant goodbye and collecting her coat and leaving, and Binta stood for a moment in the lobby and felt the full weight of what it meant to be loved by a man who had never shown anyone his real face until her. She texted Min-ho one thing. She came to say goodbye to something. "It's handled. Come find me." He appeared at her side in 4 minutes. He did not ask what was said. He simply took her hand there, in the lobby, in front of staff and remaining guests, publicly and without hesitation, and that was the entirety of his response. It was enough. It was everything. 2 weeks before the wedding, the kitchen at Yaye Binta caught fire. Not a catastrophic fire, a contained one, an electrical fault in the range hood, caught within 90 seconds by the suppression system, damaging 2 prep stations and the north wall of the kitchen, but leaving the dining room and the structural integrity of the space entirely intact. Nobody was hurt. Abina had minor smoke irritation. The fire department cleared the scene in an hour, but the kitchen was closed. And Saturday's full reservation list and 31-person wait list were looking at a minimum 2-week repair window. Binta stood in the middle of her damaged kitchen in her apron, smelling of smoke, and did not cry. She walked through the space methodically, assessed every surface, took photographs, and made a list. Then she called her contractor. Then she called Abina. Then she sat down on an overturned crate in the corner of the kitchen and allowed herself exactly 5 minutes of being a person who was exhausted and frightened, and 2 weeks from her wedding with a broken kitchen. Min-ho arrived in 23 minutes. Not in a suit. He had clearly come from home, dark jeans and a gray sweater, hair not fully styled. He walked through the kitchen door, took one look at her on the crate, and sat down on the floor directly in front of her so their eyes were level. He said nothing, he just looked at her. "Don't," she said. "What? Don't fix it, not yet, not in the first 5 minutes." She pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes. "Just be here for a minute before you start solving." He was quiet. He stayed on the floor. He waited. After a moment, she lowered her hands. Her eyes were dry. Her spine was straight. "Okay," she said. "Now you can solve." Kitchen was fully repaired in 6 days. She found out 3 weeks later that he had called in every contractor favor he had accumulated over a decade of Kang Corporation construction projects and had personally guaranteed double labor rates for round-the-clock work. She found the invoice by accident. She sat with it for a long time. She did not tell him she found it. She simply went to where he was reading in the townhouse library that evening and sat beside him and put her head on his shoulder without explanation. He turned one page, put his arm around her, said nothing. They stayed that way for an hour. The wedding happened on a Saturday in November in the private garden of the Hanam townhouse, with 43 guests and so many white flowers that Jayeon said it looked like clouds had made a decision to attend. Binta wore ivory. Off-shoulder, draped fabric that moved like water, designed by a Korean Senegalese designer, she had found through the cultural exchange community and commissioned 6 months ago because she had known, even then, that she would need a dress that held both of her worlds. Her hair was natural and magnificent, pinned with small white flowers and gold pins that had been her grandmother's. She walked out alone. No one to give her away, because she had decided long ago that she was not property to be transferred. She was a woman making a choice, and she wanted to walk toward him of her own full volition with every person she loved watching her do it. He saw her from across the garden and went completely still. She watched the stillness happen and knew what it meant now, not coldness, not control, but the specific paralysis of a man so moved that every system goes quiet. His hands at his sides closed slowly and then opened. His jaw moved once. She reached him, looked up at him. "Hi," she said softly. His voice, when it came, was very low. "Hi," the officiant said words. They said words back. The 43 guests cried at varying rates. Jayeon immediately, Abina at the vows, Kyung-min at the ring exchange which he would deny to his grave. When Min-ho spoke his vows, he had written them himself, and they were not poetic. They were precise. They were, "I will show up. I will listen. I will be afraid of the right things so you can build the brave things. I will spend the rest of my life learning your language, all of them. The spoken ones and the ones you carry in your hands when you cook and the one you speak when you're pretending not to feel something. I am yours, completely, on purpose, without reservation." Binta's vows, which she had written in Wolof and then translated and then rewritten 4 times, ended with, "You crossed a room for me when no one else would. I will cross every room for you. For the rest of our lives, I will keep crossing." Jayeon made a sound that was not a word. The honeymoon was 1 week in Jeju Island, Min-ho's idea, because he wanted somewhere that was still Korea, still close, still within reach if anything required him, which Binta teased him about and he did not apologize for. They stayed in a private villa above the sea, and for 7 days Kang Min-ho, feared, controlled, untouchable Kang Min-ho, was entirely and only a man on a cliff above the ocean learning that rest was not weakness. Binta cooked for him every morning. Simple things. Eggs. Toast. Café Tauba from her stash of Senegalese coffee beans that she had packed because she was not spending her honeymoon drinking instant. He sat at the villa kitchen table and watched her move through a kitchen the way he had been watching her from the beginning with that full, quiet attention, except now she knew he was watching and she let him. "You could have gone anywhere," she said one morning, cracking eggs. "Paris, Maldives, you have the resources." "I wanted to be reachable," he said. "I know." She smiled at the pan. "I'm teasing you." "I know." A pause. "I'll take you to Paris in the spring and Dakar." She turned. "Dakar? You haven't been home in 2 years." His voice was even, but underneath it, "I know this about you. I have been paying attention to this." I want to see where you're from. I want to meet the city that made you." She stared at him across the villa kitchen with a spatula in her hand and felt something move through her chest that had no name in any of her languages but existed fully in all of them. "Min-ho," she said. You are a very good husband." He looked at the table, his equivalent of blushing. "I'm trying to be." "You are," she said. "You are." 2 months after the wedding, she knew before she took the test. She knew the way her grandmother had told her women sometimes no, not from symptoms, not from logic, but from something older and quieter, a shift in the world's weight. She told him on a Sunday morning in the Yaye Binta kitchen before service, in the space that held both her grandmother's memory and her own future. She thought this was the right place. She was not wrong. She put the test on the prep counter between them. He looked at it. He looked at her. She watched his face go through something she had never seen on it, not the public face, not the private face she had learned, but a third face, one that had never existed before this moment, one that was being born as she watched. His eyes, those obsidian-controlled eyes, filled. He did not let it fall, but she saw it. "Min-ho," she said softly. He crossed the kitchen and held her. Both arms, completely, her face against his chest, his face in her hair. He held her the way he had held her in the parking garage, with that desperate, grateful certainty, except this time there was no danger, no rescue, no crisis. This was just a man holding the person who had given him something he had not known he was empty of. She felt the slight shake in his arms. She held on tighter. "Are you scared?" she asked quietly, a pause. "Yes, me too." He pressed his lips against the top of her head. "We'll be afraid of the right things together." She laughed, the chest laugh, the real one, into his sweater. He held her tighter. 6 months later, the second Yaye Binta location opened in Itiwan, the neighborhood where Binta had first arrived, where she had shared a small apartment with Jae-yeon and counted tips on a kitchen table, and told herself she was not thinking about a man in a black suit. The opening night was louder than the first. There were photographers now, not because of Min-ho, which was the detail that mattered, but because Yaye Binta had earned its own gravity. A food critic from Tokyo was there. A diaspora blogger from Lagos who had flown in specifically. A table of Korean grandmothers who had heard about the Benachin and needed to investigate personally and had opinions. Binta stood at the pass between the kitchen and the dining room, rounded now with 6 months of the small growing life she carried, wearing a deep gold wrap dress, her natural hair magnificent and free, and watched the full, loud, beautiful room that she had built. Min-ho appeared at her shoulder. He had learned when to stand beside her and when to stay at his table and let her room be hers. Tonight he stood beside her at the pass, just for a moment, looking at the room together. "Your grandmother would be here," he said quietly. Binta felt the tears before she decided about them. She let one go, just one. "She is," she said. He took her hand. They stood in the pass between the kitchen and the world, and looked at what 2 names above a door could mean. A grandmother's and a granddaughter's, a Dakar kitchen and a Seoul street, a rooftop insult and a crossed room, and a note on cream paper and a recipe box, and a parking garage, and a ring, and a garden of white flowers, and a Sunday morning in a kitchen where the world's weight shifted. A waiter needed to get through the pass. They stepped apart, back to their respective roles, her to the kitchen, him to his corner table. But his hand held hers 1 extra second before releasing. She felt it all the way to the kitchen. The following spring, they went to Dakar. Min-ho on a Dakar street was one of the most interesting things Binta had ever witnessed. He moved through the city with his usual calm authority, but his eyes were different, open in a way she recognized from the beginning, from a rooftop party when something impossible woke up in him. He looked at everything. The colors of the markets, the sound of Wolof around him, the ocean. The light, which was a different gold than Seoul's gold, older somehow, more certain of itself. She took him to her grandmother's neighborhood. The house was lived in by a cousin now, but the cousin welcomed them with food and noise and children who were immediately fascinated by the tall, quiet Korean man who ate everything offered to him without hesitation and said Jerejef. Thank you in Wolof, with a pronunciation that needed work, but an effort that was complete. She took him to the beach where she had decided, at 19, that she would leave Dakar and find the world. They sat in the sand in the evening light and she told him about that decision, the fear and the certainty of it, the way her grandmother had pressed both hands to her face and said, "You are made to go far. Go." He listened to all of it. He asked questions that proved he had been listening. He took nothing from the telling and added nothing to it. He simply witnessed it the way good love witnesses, fully, without needing to fix or reframe or redirect. "She would have liked you," Binta said finally. He was quiet. Then, "What would she have said when she met me?" Binta laughed. "She would have looked you up and down and said, 'This one has suffered enough to be trusted,' and then she would have fed you until you couldn't move." He looked at the ocean for a moment. "I would have liked that," he said. And it was so simple and so true and so entirely him that she had to look away at the water to collect herself. The baby kicked. She pressed his hand to the place. He went still, that particular stillness, the third face, and felt the small, enormous fact of it against his palm. "Hello," he said quietly, to the kick, to the future, to the life they had made between two worlds. The Dakar ocean rolled in and rolled back. The gold light held. On a Tuesday morning in June, in a Seoul hospital room with Jayeon packing the corridor outside and Abina downstairs, stress-eating the hospital cafeteria's entire pastry supply, Kang Min-ho, who had still a room full of crime lords, who had dismantled syndicates and moved governments, and built an empire stone by stone, sat beside a hospital bed holding his wife's hand and was, for the first time in his adult life, entirely helpless and entirely at peace with it. Because some things were not his to control. Some things you simply showed up for. He showed up. Fully. For every hour of it. And when it was over, when the room changed the way rooms change in that specific irreversible moment, and the sound arrived, the first sound, small and absolute and world-rearranging, he pressed Binta's hand to his mouth and closed his eyes and let something move through him that he had no language for in Korean or English or any of the 3 additional languages he spoke. She was watching him, even now, even in this. "Min-ho," she said. Voice wrecked and warm, he opened his eyes. "Go meet your daughter," she said. He stood. He crossed the room. The nurse placed the small, wrapped weight in his arms, and he held her with the care of a man who understood, for the first time, what it meant to hold something genuinely irreplaceable. His daughter opened her eyes. They were dark. They had her mother's shape and were already somehow looking at him with assessment and expectation. He was undone. Completely. Finally. Joyfully. They named her Yaye after a woman in Dakar who had pressed her granddaughter's face in her hands and said, "You are made to go far." She had gone far. She had gone all the way to a rooftop in Seoul, and a cruel comment and a crossed room and a note on cream paper and a wooden box full of recipes and a life she had built from the ground up with her own hands and her grandmother's courage and the love of a man who had learned to be soft for her. Min-ho had the name added to the restaurant sign. Both locations. Yaye Binta, written now in 3 scripts, Latin, Hangul, and Arabic, which was the script his wife's grandmother had learned her Quran in, 3 languages, 2 worlds. One name, one beginning that had started with an insult and ended, no, not ended, opened into the most unexpected and thoroughgoing love either of them had ever witnessed, which happened to be their own. On the evening the new sign was installed, Binta stood on the Itiwan pavement with her daughter strapped to her chest in a wrap the color of Senegalese sunset fabric, looking up at the 3-script sign above her restaurant door. Min-ho stood beside her. He did not look at the sign. He looked at her looking at the sign. "Good?" he asked. "Perfect," she said. She turned and found him watching her with that expression, the one she had been collecting since a rooftop party 2 years ago, the one that said she was the most interesting discovery he had ever made and he was still discovering. She reached up and straightened his collar, an ordinary gesture, a domestic one, the kind that accumulates into a life. "Let's go inside," she said. "Abina made the new dessert and she needs a verdict. The sesame brittle version." She added cardamom now. Consider this seriously, as he considered all things seriously. "That might work." "Absolutely works, and she knows it, and she wants me to tell her." They went inside. The door closed behind them. Through the window, Seoul moved and hummed and blazed in the evening, enormous and indifferent as ever, completely unaware that inside a restaurant with a grandmother's name above the door, a family was sitting down to eat something that tasted like 2 worlds made into one, because that was exactly what it was. That was exactly what they were.